Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer. And I have Tania Daniels with me again. And it is again because this is the second time that we're going to be recording this interview on Antiscia, because the last time we did it, we had some sound issues. And although it was okay, it could be a lot better. So here we are to do it again a lot better. Hello, Tania.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. And yes, everything is a good lesson and it can only go better than last time. So let's do it.
It felt a bit like a retrograde Mercury shadow operating last time.
Exactly, exactly. I haven't checked, but I should. Yes, exactly.
Oh, anyway, so now, Antiscia, can you please tell us what they are? Because not many people have heard of them.
Yeah, basically, Antiscia is one of the many divisions of the chart. So we have to figure the chart with Aries rising and Libra on the descendant, and we just split the chart in two halves, starting from the solstices. The solstice is in the summer solstice is in Cancer, and the winter solstice is in Capricorn. So we basically split the chart in two halves, left and right. So basically we if the Antiscia match two signs together, or they pair two signs, one from the left part of the chart, of the chart, and one of the from the right chart side of the chart. In more astronomical terms, we match those signs that are equidistant from the solstices, right? So we come up with basically six groups. So this is Gemini and Cancer. Then we have Taurus and Leo. Then we have Virgo and Aries. We have Aquarius and Scorpio, Sagittarius and Capricorn. Did I forget? And Libra and Pisces. These are the six groups. It's six signs that have the same distance from the solstices. Now, the Antiscia are also called mirror points because we mirror one point with the other on the other side of the equidistant sign from the solstice. But just make an example. Let's say we have a planet at 3 degrees Cancer. The Antiscia point, or the degree of the Antiscia, would be 27 degrees of Cancer. Gemini is 3 degrees, 27 of Cancer, right? So you would always, let's say, in order to know which is the degree, it is very simple. Take 30 degrees for like the entire sign, subtract the degree that you have a planet at, let's say 3 degrees, and we come up with 27. 30 minus 3 makes 27, right? So you would do this with whatever. Well, you have 15 degrees of, say, Sagittarius, and 15 degrees of Capricorn would be the Antiscia. We would use up to the minutes, but just to make it easier, we just calculate it in degrees, right? So the ancient astrologers used the Antiscia signs as in the same way we would use a conjunction, only that not necessarily those planets were in aspect. Take the example of Cancer and Gemini. Those signs are traditionally speaking in inversion. So if you have a planet in Cancer and another one in Gemini, we would say they don't communicate which is other, because they can't see each other. They are kind of divided, right? If there is no aspect between them, they wouldn't work together usually. But if they are in each other's anticium or degree of anticium, they would be considered a conjunction, which is actually a very potent thing. Now, many astrologers from the past used the Antiscia for all kind of aspects. So they used them when there was actually a planet at that degree. Let's say I have a planet at 13 degrees of Scorpio, and I have another planet at 17 degrees of Aquarius. They would be in Antiscia. But they would also use just the point when there was no planet, when this planet was aspected by another planet. Let's say I have Mars at 17 Pisces, and it would trine my Antiscium degree of 17 in Scorpio, right? So it would still be considered as if the planet was actually in that position, right? Now, mirrored aspects or mirrored signs are also called the shadow points, because there isn't necessarily an aspect, or if there is a planet, well, what's the difference between a true or a real aspect and an Antiscia aspect, right? So if we read through Firmicus, apparently he didn't make really a difference. He used it as where just the same. It's the same. But usually we can think about it as shadow aspects. So things that not necessarily show up as maybe an aspect would do, right? An aspect is something very strong. You have a Mars-Venus conjunction. We can talk a lot about this particular aspect. Antiscia signs are a little bit more subtle. We can often get to the point when we use them. Sometimes we have to be aware that, especially if they are in particular houses, like the 12th house, they might not show up, or the client is not aware of those things. Just consider, what happens with 12th house aspects. They can also reveal aspect patterns that have psychological issues to them. Not always, but they can, right? It depends. So we have to be careful when we use them. And I would always give the general advice first to assess and delineate the chart as we note, right? The aspects, the dignities, transits to it, whatever technique we use. So first is the assessment of the normal chart. And then we can go and check for deeper connections. For example, you are a psychologist. If you want to, for example, explore more relationship issues of a person, maybe there's always a problem with his or her relationships, and you want to know where this comes from. Maybe you want to check out where the Antiscia of the seventh house ruler is, right? Stuff like this. How Mars, if there's violence, abuse, maybe you want to check where the Antiscia of Mars is, or which planet casts an aspect via Antiscia to Mars. There's a lot of reasons we can explore this. Yes.
So to just help people who are new to this and to clarify, so what we're doing is we are looking at the distance that exists between two signs from the solstice. So we're saying that that Gemini and Cancer are the same distance from the solstice. Of course they are, because they are either side of the solstice. And then we're going to work through all the way to the winter solstice and see the distance between each of the signs and what matches it on the other side. So you can think of it as pre-summer solstice and post-summer solstice, or pre-winter solstice and post-winter solstice.
Yes,
so
exactly. Yes.
So that
very easily you can do it with the hands. You see the chart. Important that you have Aries and Libra rising, and to just look which is the the corresponding sign, and just very quickly you do it with the hands. If you can't remember the pairings, that's it. Exactly.
So this is, and actually you begin to see the pairings quite quickly. Once you start practicing, you get into the habit of it. So from a symbolic perspective, we understand that the distance is the same as from the solstice. I guess the question is, why is that important? What is it that makes measuring this distance so relevant?
Well, it has to do, as everything in astrology, it has to do with the assignment of strength. Because when you divide the signs by the solstice line, you divide them also by the ascending time. So when the signs from that go from the summer solstice to the winter solstice, which means from Cancer to Sagittarius, just before the winter solstice, they are called the straight rising signs. these signs in our astrology are related to a straight person, right? Straightforward, direct, without hiding anything. On the psychological point, from a psychological point of view, these are signs. These signs are associated with certain kinds of character, right? Straight, direct, honest, but also more time consuming. These signs need more than 2 hours to rise over the horizon. While the other signs on the other half of the zodiac are called the crooked or oblique rising signs, because these signs rise quicker over the horizon in less than 2 hours, but they are associated with like somebody who hasn't yet made his mind up, who's maybe jumping between decisions, maybe flower picking on his way, not on the right, on the highway as a straight rising sign. He's flower picking around. He is quicker, takes the shortcuts. So we have all kind of psychological, let's say, descriptions ready for the crooked rising signs, which are in a certain way the opposition of the straight rising signs. So, but from the astronomical point of view, we match one straight rising sign with one crooked rising sign, right? The pairings always have one straight and one crooked sign. And this is very important when it comes to strengths.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so we can understand that if a sign is of a nature where it's taking longer to rise, it has time to perhaps develop, perhaps to mature, but crucially also, I think the reason why it may be perceived as being straighter is that because it's had longer, you can actually see it and understand it. Whereas the others, there's a kind of embryonic quality to them, because I mean, you just need to, people just need to take a day and monitor how quickly and how slowly some signs rise. And you'd be amazed at how fast, say, Capricorn or Aries rise. It's just very, very quick. Or Pisces, you can see the difference. And I think it's like a flash in a sense, symbolically. So there isn't the chance to develop that sense of maturity that you get with the other signs that take longer. So from a symbolic perspective, of course, this is what we're saying. And so it could be then perceived that these signs are not as easy to see, to understand, to follow.
So Anna Isabel, all depends on context, right?
Exactly.
It depends what I want to look at. It's not always good to have a straight rising sign in certain conditions. Otherwise, it's not always bad to have crooked rising sign.
Exactly. And
but so obviously, if you look at,
we're saying it symbolically as an archetype, but of course, as everything, we then have to put it into a context. So if these are what we're giving you is the rule of thumb for the archetypal understanding of the difference between the signs when we're looking at Antiscia, because as you say, it's about measuring the strengths. And so, one sign is going to be stronger than the other. However, that being said, in terms of the symbolism and the archetype, we then have to put it into the context of the chart.
Yes, exactly. We always have to see, okay, what are we talking about? Where does a planet gets its inspiration from or its power from, right? And I think we can best discuss this with some charts. I have 3-4 charts we may want to look at from different perspectives. So I can share my very small presentation right now. Okay, let me see. It's just a few images. Okay, can you see it?
I can indeed, yes.
Okay, so this is just to make our listeners understand what the Antiscia signs actually are. So it's just a chart which I have colored according to the Antiscia signs. So what we see in this case Aries, and is on the AC, Libra is on the DC, which is how we can see it best. So we have this chart divided by the solstice line here. It runs through Capricorn and Cancer. So the signs that are equidistant from this line are a pair that can form Antiscia. So this would be here Sagittarius and Capricorn. Then we have Scorpio and what is it?
Aquarius.
Yes, Aquarius. The color is wrong. Aquarius is there. No, it's correct. Then we have yes, we can see how this actually works. It's just the distance, right, from the solstice line. So the groups are Gemini, Cancer, Taurus, Leo, Aries, Virgo, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Pisces, Libra, and Scorpio, Aquarius. So Firmicus used the entire sign as it appears in order to say, okay, let's say a planet in a Taurus will have will cast its Antiscium into Leo. Usually what we do today is more to use it as an aspect, as a degree. Usually it's 1 degree of orb. I would always consider the sign, but not as a very straight information. I would always look, okay, where is the exact degree of that planet? So now I have, let me see if I can get out of this mode. This is a chart of a person who I know pretty well. So if you look at this chart, I would just describe this person to you. It's when we look at the chart, we see there's a lot of fire. It's a Leo with Gemini rising, and there's a lot of fire in this chart going on. And there's an Aries moon, and the Mars is on fire, and the Sun is on fire. So actually, it should be a very outgoing, forward person. And Gemini ascendant, well, we would expect a very chatty person, a person who likes speaking and talking and connecting and socializing. But this is not the case. Actually, it's a very shy person, a very introverted person who never ever speaks up, and a very still person. So how can we see why that is?
Yes, I can see why that would be if you're talking about a Saturn conjunction, or sorry, a Saturn in Antiscia to the ascendant.
Yes, exactly.
Make it
well, the exact degree here of the Antiscia would be like 9 and something, 9 degrees and something, but we have the ascendant at 7 degrees. Now, I know it was a very difficult birth, and probably the ascendant could be off by up to 5 minutes. So in this case, I would just consider Saturn to be exactly sitting on the ascendant. And this is what shows up. So if we had Saturn on the ascendant, we would not expect a chatty person or person who is easy, to go to who has a very, let's say, talent to get in touch with people, as usual Gemini ascendant people do have. We would have expected a reversed or a reserved person with boundaries well set. And this is the same actually when you have the Antiscia of Saturn sitting on your ascendant.
Yes.
It is actually as Saturn was physically there. Even though, and I can't repeat this enough, Saturn has no aspect or doesn't cast any aspect to the ascendant because they are in aversion. So we would say Saturn is in aversion to the ascendant if we just looked at the aspect.
Well, interestingly enough, I can testify to this because I have discovered that Saturn is in Antiscia with my own ascendant, and I can really see that in different ways operating in myself, in my life. And so, and I was looking also because I was checking, okay, so what aspects are there that with this ascendant? And if you look, you can see that there's a square between Mercury and the ascendant,
Yes.
which, and it's in the fourth house. And I think it could go either way. It could amplify the Gemini, or it could kind of mute the Gemini a little bit, because it's sitting there in that fourth house. But with that, and but with Saturn involved, it really does color it in a particular way.
Well, I would suppose that this person will only speak up if he or she has enough to say. If there is, if there is already the development of a certain kind of expertise. So if the Saturn shows up in a way, dignified. I mean, if you know enough and now finally you can say what you actually think, I would expect something like that. I would expect that this person remains shut up, most closed, if he hasn't enough or she hasn't enough to say. But this is the story with Saturn, right? There is fear, there is shyness, but also there is a certain kind of mastership, right? If you are good enough and you finally believe that you're good enough, then you will come out. And then you will come out pretty powerful.
So I'm also thinking about the that there are some signs that are in Antiscia which would naturally be square anyway. So Taurus and Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius. And I'm just thinking that if they are in Antiscia, that modifies the nature of that square. And I'm thinking in particular in a synastry just at the moment, because so my dog Teddy is 15 degrees Leo, his sun, which is exactly square my Venus at 15 degrees. So why I find that interesting is because anyone who knows us knows that there is an immensely strong bond. Yes, he's challenged me in very good ways, and I think made me a better human being through his challenges. But you wouldn't think of our relationship as a square. You would think of it as a conjunction. And the fact of the matter is that there is a perfect Antiscia existing between my Venus and his sun. And it feels like that. It feels like a conjunction. It doesn't feel like a square. So these are important modifiers that we can consider when we're looking at charts.
What you are saying is totally right, but I would also make a little distinction here because we have to look on which kind of aspect we are talking about. So if it's a partile aspect, then it's already like very close, to the conjunction. I mean, from well, the degrees are very close. But usually the Antiscia have a very tiny orb, so we are talking about 1 degree. So I'm not sure how tight your
It's a,
square is. It's an exact square. So yeah, well, okay.
it's partile, and
Yes, that's
that was my point. This is a
yeah,
partile square,
yeah. Okay.
and but by Antiscia, it's actually feels like a conjunction, and I think that this is a very useful tool to add to understanding, because what it's showing us is nuance. A square is a square, except it's not. So we have to always, when we're looking at charts, understand that there are modifiers, and that a a a conjunction, a square, a trine, it may not always be what it appears to be. There might be more information that's very subtle that's behind there. And sometimes when we're working with clients, if things don't immediately resonate, there may be a reason for it. And so having these little subtle, this understanding of these subtle influences helps with that nuance.
Yeah, of course. That's right. We also have to check if a planet is in not only the other major dignities, but I think triplicity is very underestimated, for example, right? So, for example, Venus in Virgo is in her fall, but she's still in her triplicity, which oftentimes is forgotten, right? So yes, but maybe we can just switch to another example. Here I have a murder victim. I don't know if you remember the case of O.J. Simpson, who allegedly murdered his wife. Allegedly, he was convicted and then not anymore, and there were a lot of stories going on. And this is his wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. And well, when I looked at it, I found it really interesting that the Antiscia of her ascendant is at 22 Libra, which is this is a divisional chart, but usually I use a whole sign house chart, and in that case, it would be in the 8th house from the ascendant. So her Antiscia, her ascendant, the Antiscia of her ascendant is in the 8th house, in the 8th whole sign house, and it is directly squared by Mars. Well, Mars wouldn't have any aspect to that point if there was not, there is no planet there. He's not expecting actually a planet at that 22 degrees. But it is as if Jupiter, the ruler of the ascendant, or the ascendant itself, let's say the ascendant itself, was sitting there. So we have to look at the Antiscia. The Antiscia is aspected by Mars, and it makes absolutely sense that it is. You follow me?
Yes, I do. And I was just thinking about that ruler of the ascendant is actually in this chart sitting in the 8th house as well.
Yes. Well, yeah, if you look at the divisional chart, yes, absolutely. Yes. And obviously Mars and Jupiter also they are in a trine position. But a trine position between Mars and Jupiter is not always a very positive thing. We always consider Mars to be a positive planet, which he can be, but it is not always the same, as Saturn is not always a malefic. Jupiter is a natural magnifier. He amplifies things which can be good and can be very, very bad. So in this case, he's amplifying Mars.
Well,
right? And he is obviously received by Mars. So there is a double connection. So what I find interesting is when there are no obvious relations between planets, we can look at the shadow planets and say, oh, actually, yes. Because Mars is already, he's trining the ascendant, yes, the first house, but not the ascendant. This would be already a very much separate aspect, right? The ascendant is at 7 degrees Pisces. Mars is at 22, so he's separating from the ascendant. So there would not be I wouldn't normally have judged this aspect to be so difficult. But if the ascendant, the Antiscia of the ascendant is in the 8th house and Mars is expecting that by a square difficult aspect, it takes, up another color, so to speak.
Well, there are other hints in the chart, not necessarily to a violent death, because obviously that's always hard to. It's easier to see that in hindsight, although the potential for violence is there.
Sure.
But there are other hints in this chart that relationships are problematic and something to work on. Not least of which we have that North Node in Libra in the 7th house, suggesting that relationships are an arena that's going to require a fair amount of work. And you're pointing out this link to Mars. Well, Mars is sitting in that 5th house as well. So there's quite a lot here that's suggesting that relationships could be tricky.
Yes.
So it's again, as you said, it's the context, isn't it?
Yes, sure. Well, we wouldn't have forecasted obviously violent as just by the Antiscia, right? But
Yeah.
we can see in hindsight how much importance actually this aspect seems to have for this particular native. So yes, this is just an example of how we can use it. Obviously, you could also look at the transit or other points, how this point might be afflicted.
Exactly. I was also thinking it would be interesting to have seen where Pluto was in the middle of all of this, in this chart as well, and Uranus. But you've stuck to the original, the original seven.
Yes, I do. But let's discuss another chart. This is when she died. Well, when she died, when she was murdered, actually. I found it very interesting that this particular degree was aspected by the transiting sun to the degree, right? It was 22 degrees was the Antiscia, 22 is the sun. And you were asking where the outer planets were. Here I have them. This was Neptune, and Neptune was aspecting, also squaring the Antiscia. There are many, many more aspects, obviously, to look at the chart, but we're just discussing the Antiscia. So there it is, right? Yeah,
Well,
you would look at Pluto and Jupiter. I see it. Yes.
yeah.
But this is a topic for entire different session. But just to show you, the Antiscia will always show up in some way if they are important in the chart. And here we have two important transits, right?
Indeed. Thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, and I have another one, and that's the last one. That's Ted Bundy. I'm sure everybody knows who this horrific being was. He killed at least 30 women, and he was a necrophile, so had even sex with their cadavers or corpses. So anyway, I plan a person really horrific person. Interesting is, well, not surprisingly, he has Saturn in the first house, not on the ascendant, but in the first house, which Saturn has to do with this necrophilism, right? Anyway, the Antiscia of Saturn is very close to the MC, so it might even be conjunct. We don't know exactly the minutes, but forget about that. We have the Antiscia at more or less 21 degrees of Taurus. Now look where the Venus is. Venus is in opposition, pretty much straight opposition in Scorpio in the fourth house. So very interesting, because if we just look at the aspect, then we have a separating Venus from, she is squaring by house or by sign, also the ascendant, but she's pretty far away from Saturn. So we wouldn't have judged this as so difficult aspect, actually, because already going, well, actually, no, she's retrograde, she's applying, but still far away, it would be out of orb. But now she makes an exact conjunction to his Antiscia. So there it is again, right?
And
Problems with women.
and Scorpio as well. So,
Yeah, of
not
course.
a happy Venus. So, and we can see a Moon Mars conjunction too. And it's all happening in that fifth house as well, with the South Node too. So, this is obviously, we are not, and I stress, we are not saying that if you have Saturn in the first house, you are
No,
by
no, wait.
default a nasty individual. We
I
are
didn't
not.
even realize that I have two charts with Saturn in the first house. Now it was not on purpose. It was
No.
no.
So this is not the case. But in this chart, what we're saying is that these are the indicator. There are some of the indicators that would make us think that perhaps there's an issue around relationships, sexual relationships with women.
Yes, we
And
could also see that Saturn and that Mars and the Moon are conjunct, right? And their anticium is at 13 degrees of Capricorn, and the contra-anticium is here in the 12th house. So there are many ways to work with that, right?
I think so. If you're finished, I suppose we can stop sharing now, and
I
see
think
more
so.
clearly.
Yes. I think yes, we had to just do, let me see, stop sharing. Yes.
So
Back to normal.
this is a wonderful illustration of how Antiscia can reveal things that are not so clear, not so visible in the chart. And this is why they're relevant. They're helpful. And I know that, for those like me who are therapists, this is very, very helpful, because we can sometimes see the things that our clients are not quite ready to tell us yet, and gently help them along the way to reveal themselves a little bit more, so that they, in fact, reveal themselves to themselves, not always just to us, but to themselves, because there are sometimes things that we don't want to admit to, because it's a bit too scary. So if we have, as I do as a therapist, this additional way of looking at what's behind the scenes, then we can help them very gently to begin to see what they don't readily want to admit to or see. So this is from a psychological perspective. Obviously, from an horary perspective, that's also quite relevant.
Obviously, yes, of course. And there's something else that I would to add. We said it at the beginning, but maybe we should just address it properly. When we have an aspect, especially between two planets, the Antiscia. So I have one planet and the other one is conjunct by Antiscia. When we have a degree occupied on that particular Antiscia degree, then we want to look which of those two planets is stronger. And yes, we look at our dignities. So we see one planet is a fall, the other is an exaltation or whatever. But we also look which one is in the sign of straight ascension and which one is in the crooked sign. So all depends on context. But usually the planet that is in the straight rising sign is stronger. There are exceptions to it, but just as a rule of thumb, we can say that. Look which planet is in the straight rising sign and has a more forthcoming power. That planet would ideally, tell the other sign what to do, which is more, crooked, oblique rising, and thus more following orders. General rule of thumb. Okay. And this makes sense, especially in medicine, right? If you want to look where our sixth house planets are, how they are combined. If I have a first house where my ascendant is maybe conjunct something in the sixth house, hopefully the first house planet, the ascendant ruler, will be stronger. So there are many things that we can consider and that will reveal us a part of the chart that we have maybe not looked at, that we have never considered. So I would invite all the people who are listening at the moment just to have a look at their chart and to just pinpoint or write out at which exact degree every planet has its Antiscia and see what comes out of that.
And for those of you who are allergic to maths, there are tables out there that you can use in terms of the degrees.
Yes.
Just a final kind of point to further illustrate things. The first example you showed, where we had Gemini rising, the Antiscia with Saturn, Saturn being in Cancer. So Gemini would be the weaker of the two signs, because it's a shorter ascension than Cancer. Would that then mean, in your mind, that Saturn has a stronger grip on the ascendant than if, say, we were looking at Virgo rising with Saturn in Aries?
Well, there are many considerations to do, many things to consider. Probably yes.
Just in theory.
Also, because obviously Saturn has a triplicity rulership in the chart. It's especially in a daytime chart. This was a nighttime chart, but usually in a daytime chart, Saturn would be exceptionally strong. But even in a nighttime chart, it's a tricky question, because Virgo, Mercury was very strong in its own sign. What I think is this person will experience a very harsh Saturn in his or her first years, and then learn how to manage that. So
Yeah.
I would suspect that that Virgo will become stronger because of the dignities, and it's a nocturnal chart. I would suspect that it will become stronger over time, but that Saturn will be a huge problem, let's say in the first whatever half of the life or third of the life, so certainly through adolescence and young adulthood, if you want to say so. Yes.
I just wanted to establish the in principle without the additional context, because obviously then we have to look at the additional context, but just in principle, just to give people an idea of how that would work. So I think that that's a thought to play with. In fact, the whole thing is to play with. So I expect those of you who have until this moment not been very familiar with Antiscia to start playing with them and see what you can see.
just last thing before we close. Consider that the entire spectrum of Saturn. So Saturn can set boundaries, can make a person just shut his mouth or her mouth and just total block the person. But it is also, there's also the other range of the good things that this planet has to offer. And this is he's a good teacher. He's a good he brings us to mastership through problems, a lot of problems. If it's Saturn, you know what Saturn on the ascendant means. It's pushing you continuously while he's taking you back. So he is like, it's a break. He's a break on your running mode, right? We can maybe say that. But now, since you can't run, you can look around the panorama and you will see a lot of things that other people might not see. So do never judge a planet just by, oh, it's a good planet or it's a bad planet. That doesn't exist in astrology. Saturn will give you more responsibility. Saturn will, because Gemini is not necessarily a very responsible sign, right? It's chatty, it talks and blah, blah, blah. But Saturn will change that. So maybe we should sometimes just appreciate what we have been gifted, instead of saying, oh, I have Saturn and it's horrible, right? Just.
Do you know what? I always think of Saturn like this. You know those teachers you had in school that were not very popular, but you had no choice but to learn? That's Saturn.
Yes. But you did learn.
Exactly.
You did learn, because that was a teacher who maybe explained things in a slowlier way, right? He who gave more examples, maybe a teacher who himself has gone through hard lessons and can actually understand the people, not necessarily the nice and friendly guy, or always laughing, but coming straight to the point. That's more Saturn. Yes.
I always think of my year 7 teacher, who was probably the strictest teacher I ever had, the strictest teacher in the school, took no nonsense, but was also a very good teacher in that she was on the case. She was on your case. She didn't let you get away with anything. And I think everybody did actually do very well in her class. So she wasn't unkind. She wasn't unkind. She was very good in many, many ways, but boy, did we learn a lot from her. And no, we couldn't slack. That was the thing, is that we couldn't slack. She was fair. She was very fair. We couldn't slack. A lot of the children didn't like her, but they all had a tremendous amount of respect for her. That's Saturn.
Exactly. Good word. Respect. Yes. Yes, I think that's it. Exactly. That's the perfect description of Saturn on the ascendant. Yes.
And I would wager that every one of us remembers her.
Yeah, no doubt of that. Maybe we can also say, we could also look how the person, the physical aspect of the person, because we would also see that Saturn being reflected, maybe a person who like to wear black clothes, or very, yeah, all the things that we associate with the Saturn on the ascendant thing. But this is material for another talk. So
It is
for
indeed
the moment, we will have
on-
all our listeners look up their ascent, their Antiscia, and write and say about that. Yes.
wonderful. Tania, thank you so much for giving us so much food for thought. I knew that this was a subject that I wanted to cover because I've been thinking about it a lot because of having done a wonderful medical astrology course with the fabulous Marcos Patchett, where I had read about them before. I suddenly had to start thinking about them and using them, and then I thought, well, I think I need to have somebody come and talk about them. And he said, I know just the person. So here you are. So thank you very much. And thank you all for watching. And next time we're looking at perfections. Until then, goodbye.